all together in person again here, so I am going to go ahead and open the meeting of the Solid Waste Working Group. And thanks everybody for coming. Since we were online last time, we couldn't approve the minutes, so our first order of business is to approve the minutes from December 10th and February 25th. I'm just going to make it for one motion, unless, do people have comments on either set of minutes? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Second? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Our first controversial vote. Okay. Just in the last month or two, there's just really been a lot of discussion about what municipalities can and can't do, what they're authorized to do, how the permitting works, and that sort of thing. And the more I thought about it, I thought that just in an effort to get all of us to the same place, kind of knowledge-wise, I know some of you will know a lot about this and others won't, and also for the public that does watch our live streams, I thought it would be really beneficial for us to have a couple of speakers who were really familiar with how all this works for the municipalities. And it happens we have experts right here on our team, on our group, and so I had asked Reagan Bissonette of NRRA to go ahead and kick it off with a presentation on what they do with towns and recycling. So,
sure. Thank you.
Thank you. So, you want to go up or whatever you want to do?
I think I'll stay here.
Okay.
After 2 years of Zoom meetings, I'm used to sitting.
Okay.
So thank you. Yes, I was asked to spend a bit of time talking today about the Northeast Resource Recovery Association, how we help communities manage their recycling, and also in particular to spend a bit of time talking about municipal transfer stations and how they transport material to final markets for disposition, and really some of the economics involved with that. So just to kick off, I am the Executive Director of the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. We do work with a number of the communities and businesses represented on the working group, and I'll give some examples of that. And in addition, Brian Patno of Lancaster is a member of our Board of Trustees. So, is it on? Oh, no. Do you want to just advance my slide?
Too far, yeah.
I only have a handful of slides. I'm mostly talking. So, the Northeast Resource Recovery Association is a recycling nonprofit, and we were founded over 40 years ago. And we today have 450 members across New England, mostly municipalities. And here in New Hampshire, where we were founded, about 85% of all the towns and cities in New Hampshire are members of ours. Our mission is basically to help municipalities manage their own recycling programs in both an environmentally sound way and also in a financially sustainable manner. And both of those pieces is really important. So last year, we helped return over $1.8 million net to our members from the sale of their recyclables. And the environmental impact of that was essentially to avoid greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to removing about 22,000 passenger cars from the road for an entire year. Now, we also provide a lot of hands-on technical assistance to communities to help them actually get connected with the companies that want to acquire their recyclables. And in this way, we're a very unique nonprofit. We're one of only a handful of nonprofits in the entire country that operates a cooperative model where we're actually helping municipalities sell their recyclable material. Now, in terms of what we help, now I'll need you to do it for me.
That's fine.
So in terms of what these cooperative programs look like, this snapshot sort of gives you a sense also accept, of course, construction and demolition debris, municipal solid waste, scrap metal, refrigerant, materials, bulbs, electronics. So our transfer stations are really accepting a wide variety of material in New Hampshire, and we help them find outlets for that. So as I mentioned, we do work with a number of companies represented on the working group. So for example, we have communities who sell their scrap metal to Schnitzer. We have communities that recycle their construction and demolition debris with resource waste. We have communities that bring their glass to Waste Management's Turnkey Facility in Rochester, where it's actually crushed into an aggregate and used in local infrastructure projects. Next. So in New Hampshire, we have a lot of small communities. We have 234 towns and cities in New Hampshire, and about 70% of those have their own municipal transfer station. Now, the remaining 30%, they either are partnering with another community, so in some cases communities share a transfer station, or in some cases they might have a private facility in their town. So example, in Bethlehem, they have the Casella Waste Systems transfer station at their disposal. Now, the majority of communities in New Hampshire source separate their recyclables, and that is because we've got a lot of smaller communities, and in many cases having a smaller drop-off system works well for them. But on the flip side, over for 50%, the majority of residents in New Hampshire are served by single-stream recycling systems. And that's because, of course, larger communities and cities are more likely to have single-stream recycling, and that's where the bulk of our population is. So in terms of just clarifying a bit what transfer stations can do under their permits, there has been some recent confusion in some House bills about this issue. So at the very basic level, transfer stations in New Hampshire are designed to receive recyclables and other solid waste. They store that material for a period of time, and then they're transferring it somewhere else for ultimate, management. So within that, virtually all municipal transfer stations in New Hampshire are authorized to take in municipal solid waste, construction and demolition debris, and a wide variety of recyclables. And yet, interestingly, there have been two bills that were recently passed by the House that frankly seem unnecessary. Representative Liebel had asked to at least briefly address those. So for example, one bill, HB 1122, would authorize communities to accept and sell construction and demolition debris. Typically, they already have that authority. Most municipalities are already doing that. Similarly, there is HB 1406, which would authorize municipalities to collect compostable materials and then to contract with companies to take away that material, such as food scraps. Municipalities are commonly already accepting food scraps as part of their solid waste. Whether they are going to be putting it into the trash or sending it elsewhere is probably, in most cases, it's simply a matter of notifying DES, perhaps updating your operating plan. But this is not something we really need a law change to allow municipalities to do. So just wanted to clarify that piece. So next I want to talk about transportation. So these communities, they receive this material and then they need to transport it to where it's ultimately going to be managed. And this is a really big topic because it's a large source of costs for communities. Next slide, please. So when we talk about transportation, all of these communities need to be sending their material elsewhere for it to be managed. And I think sometimes this step gets overlooked in terms of the budgetary impacts for communities. So certainly trash and construction demolition debris is often disposed of in New Hampshire. We have plenty of outlets for that. Some of our border communities are sending that material out of state. By and large, our recyclable materials are getting moved all over. Some are going to New Hampshire. We have a paper mill we work with in New Hampshire that accepts cardboard from communities. Some of this material is going elsewhere in New England or the New York region. We've got another paper mill we work with there. And then some material is getting sent even further afield. So I mentioned that some glass through our organization is getting crushed in Rochester and then used locally in infrastructure projects. But other glass is getting sent either up to a vendor in Canada for our organization or to a location in Massachusetts where it's then processed further and then sent to companies where it's going to be turned into new glass bottles and jars or fiberglass insulation. So there's really a pretty wide range of where this material needs to get to. And the bottom line is that in New Hampshire, we're typically sending all of this material by truck. Now, certainly, some communities own their own trucks, and they have their staff to move that material, but more often, communities are contracting with a local hauler to get that material where it needs to go. You know, one thing I want to point out is that some communities don't seem to have a good understanding of the distinction between their transportation costs and then their ultimate cost for managing that material once it gets to where it's going. So, as an example, we recently worked with a community who has a scrap metal container on their site, and they fill it once a week, and someone comes and takes it away. And I asked them what they were getting paid for their scrap metal. And they said, nothing. We're not getting paid anything. They also said, we're not paying to have it taken away either. And I said, well, that's all well and good. But once we ran the numbers and we could show them what they would pay to actually cover the transportation of getting that to a local vendor, and then what they would receive in revenue from the actual sale of that scrap metal, this small change is going to make a meaningful financial impact on this community in terms of they're actually going to start getting revenue from this material. So I think that is not uncommon for communities to not have that level of transparency in the distinction between transportation and then ultimately what you're paying or receiving per ton for materials. So wanted to raise that. Now certainly one important piece, you know, obviously we've had significant increases in the cost of fuel recently, and that has obviously driven up the cost of transportation for everyone, whether you're in the recycling business or not. But even before that, in recent years, we've had really a shortage of truck drivers. You know, long haul driving is really hard work, and there's been a shortage of drivers, and that has really complicated transportation logistics in general, and again, driven up costs. So this is something that is really beneficial for communities to be paying attention to. Communities can take a lot of steps to reduce their transportation costs, and they do this in a number of ways, and it's primarily by compacting and densifying material. So when it comes to trash or construction and demolition debris, having a compactor or having a pre-crusher to basically make sure that you're not sending a truck that is full of air on the road. Communities might also use compactors for loose recyclables, or they might use balers to actually densify their bales of material. So again, you don't want to be sending a truck on the road that's really only partially full of material, because that really drives up transportation costs. And a number of our communities are, you know, sending loose material, and that costs them more money. So another factor, of course, in transportation is you can't change the fact that some communities are further away from services than others. So, for example, if a community up in the North Country is going to be working with, you know, an electronics vendor located on the seacoast, it's going to cost them more to get their material to that vendor than a community that's located in the southern part of the state. For example, I know this is a challenge in the North Country. It's very expensive if communities want to get their construction and demolition debris to a facility that can actually recycle it, such as in the southern part of the state, and it's typically cheaper for them to be throwing that material away and disposing of it because of that transportation cost. So it has a meaningful impact on whether or not it makes financial sense for communities to even recycle certain items. Next slide. So once material gets to where it's going, I think this is the type of information that people tend to pay a bit more attention to, which is what is it going to cost, or what are communities going to receive per ton for the material that they're managing. So is a snapshot of market pricing for different vendors that the Northeast Resource Recovery Association works with throughout New England. And it's really a snapshot in time. Recyclables are commodities, and like the stock market, those prices go up and down. So I want to emphasize that at any given time, this is going to look different than the numbers I'm showing you today. Some of the pricing for the different vendors that we work with changes weekly, monthly. With things like scrap metal, it can change daily. I didn't include that one on the slide, but this is very much a moving target. And every time I show this slide in a presentation, it always looks different. So please keep all of that in mind. This also assumes that the recyclables listed are actually being baled, so densified as much as possible, and then shipped in full tractor trailer loads. Again, if a community can send a full truckload of material somewhere, they're typically going to get a better price. So with all that being said, there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out from this slide. One is for people to keep in mind that the lightweight items are typically some of the more valuable items. So you're seeing at the top, you've got aluminum cans, you've got number 1 and 2 plastics, have the most value per ton. And yet, you have to keep in mind that it takes a lot of volume for communities to get a ton of this material because it's so lightweight. So typically, actually those materials, we typically talk about them in terms of the price per pound because of that factor. So people sometimes get really excited about some of these numbers up the top, like aluminum cans being worth upwards of $2,000 a ton. Well, that's because it takes a lot of aluminum cans to get a ton. On the other hand, when you're looking at things like fibers, which includes cardboard, paper products, those items are a bit lower in terms of value, but they tend to make up over 60% of the municipal recycling stream. So that's really a lot of what communities have when they're recycling is those fibers. And then you'll see glass down at the bottom actually is typically a cost for communities to recycle this material. And even though this is going to be more applicable for a community that is source separating and has these separate materials to market, similarly, when you send single stream recycling to a materials recovery facility, that materials recovery facility is then going through the work of separating out that material, compacting it into bales, and then shipping out to market for, similar types of range of prices. So that was one thing I wanted to sort of share from this slide. Another thing is just to talk about the benefit of cost avoidance. So it's important to keep in mind that even if communities are paying to recycle certain material, it can still make financial sense if they're able to avoid the higher cost of disposal. So for example, for communities that are recycling glass through one of our programs, in New Hampshire they'd be paying typically between $40 and $45 a ton to recycle that glass. Now on the other hand, if they're paying, say, $85 a ton for their trash, then they're still going to be reducing their costs by recycling that glass instead of just throwing it away. Now, another thing is that typically communities are going to receive more value for items that are fully separated out. So for example, if a community separates out their plastics into different types of plastic, number 1 plastic, they're going to get a better price than if everything is sort of mixed up together, because you're essentially outsourcing that cost of separation to someone else. So for example, again with single stream recycling, communities are getting the convenience of not having to separate out that material, and also you have to keep in mind it often will take less staff time for a community to manage a single stream recycling system than to have the staff to oversee a source separated system. So it's not that one is better than the other, it's just that your costs are in different places. And another thing to talk about is that this is assuming that a community doesn't have a contract. So this is sort of representing spot market pricing, current pricing that a community could get for these materials. But of course, some communities work under contracts for their solid waste. So municipalities may have, it's more common for municipalities to have a contract for their trash and their construction and demolition debris, in part because that's such a steady stream of material that they need to manage and they need to have an outlet for that. Whereas for recycling, some communities will have a contract, some won't. I have to say, I've been kind of surprised at how many communities maybe don't have any contracts for managing their solid waste. So it really is quite variable in terms of whether communities are actually in some kind of a short-term or long-term contact to secure an outlet for their material or not. The benefit of contracts is that it provides better predictability for budgets so that communities can really plan ahead for what's otherwise can be quite uncertain costs. On the other hand, if a community doesn't have a contract, one of the downsides is if an outlet, say for example a landfill, is nearing its capacity limits at the end of the year and needs to reduce the amount of material it can take in, if a community who's been taking their trash to that landfill doesn't have a contract, they might get turned away and suddenly need to find and be scrambling for another outlet to take their municipal solid waste. So really bottom line, it's pretty much a mixed bag for whether communities are using contracts or not to help them manage their recycling and solid waste programs. So I mean, with that, we touched briefly on how the Northeast Resource Recovery works with communities, how transfer stations accept and transport material, and then what they can expect to pay or get paid once they're managing that material in the end. And I just wanted to end by making sure everyone is aware that we have a conference, recycling conference and expo coming up. I would have shared it at the end anyway for updates, but for over 40 years we've had a conference that focuses exclusively on municipal recycling. This year we're looking forward to being in person again. We will be based in Manchester, New Hampshire. A number of folks here in the room are already planning on attending, and I'd really encourage and invite anyone from the solid waste working group who'd be interested in coming, any of the members of the public who are listening in, because this is a really great opportunity to talk all things municipal recycling. And certainly the majority of our attendees do come from New Hampshire. So here's my contact information if anyone has questions, afterwards, but I'm happy to answer any questions now, or if you want to hold that until after Steve talks.
I think we can do questions now. I don't know if people had specific questions, but I did, since Adam and Brian and Duncan all represent towns here, I didn't know if there was anything you guys wanted to add to the discussion.
Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation, and I worked at NRA for many, many years, and listening made me miss it. I miss that world. So I would just add that from my perspective, one cost that we deal with is collection costs. Right now, my collection costs are, I want to say, $1.2 million, and my disposal cost is $700,000. So that's a cost that we really struggle with managing. When our contract is up, that's going to change quite a bit, but that's a significant cost for the curbside collection programs.
And you do the pay-as-you-throw?
We do pay-as-you-throw. Yeah, we finance the trash part of our collection through the pay-as-you-throw revenues. Correct.
Brian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I said, pay-as-you-throw is definitely the way to go. Lancaster started it in '98, I believe, and we have not raised their prices. $1.50 a bag still. We also look at it as we're paying just for the disposal, not paying for any labor costs, stuff like that. Other towns, bag prices are higher, it's usually because they want to cover the labor.
Yeah.
That's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, with regard to pay-as-you-throw, I don't know if the committee has considered having a presentation on that, but Steve was Point Zero is an excellent resource. He used to be a city manager of Springfield, Mass. So now he works at this Point Zero, and they're our vendor for our pay-as-you-throw bags, and he does a great professional presentation.
Well, I was gonna say, when we get to the subcommittee discussion, we have to sort of figure out how some of these concepts fit into whatever subcommittees we create, so they can be as useful as possible. Brian, you collect C&D at your,
Yes.
yep, and you landfill it?
We landfill, unfortunately, yes. Once again, the transportation cost is just way too much, and we're afraid. So we did just barely raise our price to $30 a cubic yard, because figuring in prices for this year, we would have lost about 47.5%. Now we're going to still be losing, even at that $30 a yard, we're going to be losing probably 15% or so, but at least it's helping cover the cost while not upping the price too much.
Do you wanna add anything, Duncan?
Sure. Well, I mean, I would just say that, I've been affiliated with NRRA for a very, very long time, former president of the Board of Trustees, and the NRRA model has been great to a point. But the reason that we're all here is that we recognize that there's a problem, and that whatever NRRA is offering is not really going to move the needle in any meaningful way unless we start talking about infrastructure to deal with this. I just think that, we've gotten to the point where I think we have to recognize that unless we're really talking about a meaningful investment in infrastructure so that municipalities have opportunities to send the resource stream that is currently mostly being buried or burned, and we don't, if we don't address that fundamental issue, then we're going to end up delivering a report that will again not move the needle from where we need to go. If we're going to continue to use our disposal facilities as our primary means of getting rid of our waste, and we're not going to be diverting anywhere near what is potentially available to divert, which I'm saying is probably, instead of 30%, is probably 80+%. So I hope that we can meaningfully talk about what's necessary to change this, because just educating our way out of this or continuing to promote programs that are offered by NRRA, which are good programs, but it's not enough. We need more.
So I remember when we had our study committee, we talked a lot about the hauling issues and storage concerns at towns, like especially for plastics and things like that. But I guess all the towns are making their individual arrangements for hauling. We talked a little bit about, if there could ever be a mechanism where a truck could go around and collect like plastics. It was plastics that it really came up.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some options for that. So I mean, the Northeast Resource Recovery Association, we can help communities with what's called a milk run, where maybe we have two communities reasonably near each other. One has, a half a truckload of aluminum cans or plastic. The other has another half a truckload. We're able to get one truck to go and stop at each location, and then you've got your full truck, and the community is able to get the best price. Another option is there are some vendors that we work with who can take mixed commodity loads. So for example, you can fill one truck with cardboard, newspaper, a few bales of office paper, a few bales of mixed paper, and then it can all go to one company who can process that. But especially with our smaller communities, that just gets harder and harder. I mean, most companies, they don't want to deal with a lot of small communities. It's much easier for them to deal with, one large city that's going to send them a ton of steady material. Logistically, it's much harder to coordinate a lot of small communities, and that's honestly why our organization exists in large part, is to help a lot of small communities try and coordinate some way, but it's challenging.
All right. Anybody else have any other comments? Go ahead, Steve.
Just a point relative to something that Duncan mentioned, regarding the difficulty in handling some of the materials that we generate. Our company has, in January, got involved, purchased a majority share of a company called Contingency one.
because they've got it on the
Sure.
screen here.
Sure, the one problem that, I mean, I would see from New Hampshire is that looking at the need for about 500,000 tons to justify the financial investment for one of these projects, very expensive. So we're focusing initially on the cities, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, LA. I think we've got one that's going to Houston, Texas. So there's other technology out there, but difficult to get those up and going, you know, in a small rural setting, you know, that we have here in New Hampshire. But there's options that are out there, and if we have good luck, we can scale those down in size to maybe spread out those types of opportunities for the future. Just a question for you, Reagan. You mentioned, I was surprised by the comment, you said many municipalities don't have contracts to manage their waste. Really?
I would say, at least with the communities we work with, while some have contracts for, it's more common for their municipal solid waste and their construction demolition debris, but many of the communities we work with don't have a contract for their recyclables, they don't have a contract for their trash. Again, I'm talking mostly communities that sort of separate.
Yeah.
I mean, more commonly communities that are working with a single stream system or even dual stream. It's more common to see that they have contracts, but a lot of communities are just, you know, they might have a handshake deal with someone who's been handling their material for a long time. You know, we did have a situation where the community who had been sending their construction and demolition debris to a certain outlet, working with a local hauler, and then suddenly that outlet was no longer available, and they came to us seeing if we could help them find a new home for their C&D. So I have been surprised by that, and I attribute it to us having so many smaller communities. You know, certainly larger cities are gonna have contracts.
That's interesting. Okay.
Seems like a lot more administrative management, I mean, trying to figure out, yeah. So, anybody else? I just wanted to ask you if you could zero in a little bit more on this whole issue of glass. Glass is just really, really heavy, right? And, I mean, at one point I think you told me that the company that was recycling glass is no longer operational. Is there someplace, and that could, all these things could be changing, but other than crushing the glass for projects, is there a way to recycle it, or how are towns dealing with that? 'Cause it's so heavy.
So the challenge with glass is, right, in part it's heavy, and so it's very expensive to dispose of in states like New Hampshire, where we're allowed to just dispose of glass. Our neighboring states, by and large, they don't let you put glass in a landfill, at least not full bottles or jars. The challenge is that, so for small communities that have a really good source separated system, where their residents are just separating out glass bottles and jars, that glass is contamination free enough that it can go directly to a company that's going to process it to ultimately get turned into new glass bottles and jars or fiberglass insulation. That's sort of the highest use. The problem is when you get something like Pyrex or ceramics, which are very common, like if someone throws their Yankee Candle Pyrex container into the pile, if that makes it into the manufacturing line for new glass bottles and jars, those items have a higher melting point. So when you melt the glass, those items stay solid. And then if you end up with a glass bottle that has a bit of Pyrex or ceramic in it, it weakens the bottle. And then if you carbonate that bottle, you've got a major hazard. And so, for example, you know, a company we work with, they sent a load of crushed glass to one of their customers. That load was tested and had too much ceramic in it that snuck through somehow. They got charged a $30,000 fee for that. So they have very tight standards. And similarly, if you're melting glass to be made into fiberglass insulation, it gets to blow fiberglass insulation, you're basically, it's like a cotton candy drum. You know, the melted glass is coming out through these spindles. And if you have a small piece of Pyrex or ceramic that hasn't melted, clogs up one of those spindles, it can cost $2,000 to replace one little spindle, and you're talking about a factory full of them. So it becomes very difficult for communities to provide that level of glass. What I will say is that in states that have bottle deposit systems, if you were just having residents redeeming glass, you have a very pure supply of glass, and then companies will pay for that glass because they know they don't have to spend as much time and energy or risk that it's going to have something other than glass in it. And so they'll pay for that glass, and that glass is much more likely to get turned into new glass bottles and jars or fiberglass insulation. So much of the glass in the United States is getting landfilled because it is difficult. It is more difficult, and especially like a single stream system, which again most large communities have. It is harder to pull that glass out in a way that you're going to have glass that doesn't have a bunch of other things in it. Certainly some materials recovery facilities have invested in the infrastructure to get glass out early, but it is not uncommon to look at glass coming out of a materials recovery facility and to see that it also has a lot of paper and plastic and other things in it, and you can't take that and turn that back into glass bottles and jars. It's just too contaminated. And so it can be crushed and used as cover on landfills. It can just be landfilled, but there's less options for glass like that if it isn't a very pure supply of glass. So that's why we offer communities the option, if they can't meet that higher standard for our vendor who's setting that glass to be made into new glass bottles, we allow communities to then crush glass, and then and that's easier for communities to meet that standard, and then it can be used in local infrastructure projects like at the Turnkey Facility, underneath a road, underneath a sidewalk, underneath a solid waste building foundation.
Well, it just shows that nothing's easy because a lot of people, they want to use glass instead of plastic for containers, and then we have the glass issue.
It is tough.
Right, and not to belabor it, but just something else that we've learned along the way is that, I actually serve on Public Works and Highways, where we talk a lot about infrastructure in the state, and I was really interested in using the crushed glass for state projects, but the crushing standard for state projects, it's called the AASHTO standard, is different than a lot of communities are crushing their glass. And so we wanted to sort of kick off some sort of pilot project, but the other side of the coin is that contractors are nervous to sign on to a project that will use the glass because they want to make sure they have enough glass for the project. Like, so if it's a huge, like Route 93 or something, they don't want to sign on to use all glass if they don't know that they have the right source. So there's also a standard size differentiation that we're challenged with too. So I think a lot of us don't think so much of glass as an issue, but I think it really is in terms of weight and recycling.
Representative Eagle, there's also one other factor that if the town is crushing glass to spec for DOT spec, but they're 100 miles away from the construction project, it makes no sense to haul it there.
Yeah, right. It gets really, anyway, but that was a bill that we put forth after the study committee that died during COVID, and DOT has enough problems, so we'll just let it go for the moment. But as we're thinking about different alternatives and making recommendations from the group, glass is just yet another issue. So, any other questions or comments?
Jim, just such a great talk. In the 4 years I've been playing in this game, I think it's important for us to always get across to the public. There's no simple answer to this complicated problem. I wish there was, but when you're the nerds who drill down into it, and plastic had the same problem. We put the wrong plastics together, and then there's no market because of melting point, So if we could just get across to the public, it's never as simple as we wish it was, and it comes down to economics and then the political will of the people. It always has. The states that have been leaders in this, Oregon, Washington State, they're willing to put state tax money into it, and it's still a big deal for them to get to 50% conversion. So just hope we can keep reminding folks it's just not simple. 4 states were all for composting, and most of their facilities got shut down because of odor. So when you drill down into it,
There's so
and I'm
many
not trying to be a
factors.
naysayer, I'm just trying
No.
to make sure everybody's on the same page,
Yeah.
We
Well,
keep
I have to-
trying, we keep trying.
Well, I have to say, actually, Stonyfield came into our study committee and talked about an analysis they did on whether to use glass or plastic. they did, I don't know, 5 years ago or whatever, was that actually from a greenhouse gas perspective and transportation and waste, it was better environmentally for them to be using the plastic. Of course, that assumed that people were going to recycle the 5, you know, whatever that is, and I'm not sure that happens. So anyway, yeah, nothing's easy. Is it, Director Wimsatt?
No, I find everything really easy.
Oh, yeah, do you? Anyway, well, we're fortunate to have a representative from Waste Management here who can talk to us about the world of landfill, which is a hot topic in New Hampshire these days. So
Sure is.
take it away, Steve.
Okay.
Steve is my one.
Oh, very close.
And bear with me, I'm gonna turn the microphone because Steve, you were very slow. Yeah, I'm gonna go.
Is the clicker working for you? Is it on?
I think so.
It is on. Okay, it is on.
Trick.
That's not seeing it.
Well, while Steve's doing that, he may say this, but unless you think you've time traveled to April 27th, I think Steve is doing a presentation on the 7th. Yeah, really, to April 7th. He's doing a presentation.
Yeah,
So.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I took this first slide from the other deck and I
Yeah.
didn't update it, sorry about
I'll click through.
Yeah, I'm
Just
not
let me-
sure.
I don't know what's going
that.
on.
It's too high tech. Anyway. All right, so I was asked to talk about municipalities and how the private sector and municipalities interact and how contractual issues get addressed and how folks contract with us for service. It's timely. I think there's a Senate bill that's probably going to go through that's going to expand some of the scope of this group. And it's going to ask us to take a look at municipalities that have or need to have solid waste management plans and restricting private landfills from accepting waste from municipalities that don't have solid waste plans in place. So it hasn't been finalized, but it's, by the sounds of it, that's going to go through. So it's something we're going to have to add to our agenda to this in the future, I guess. Anyway, so I want to just take a minute to talk about disposal capacity in New England. I know we're here about New Hampshire, but there's a lot of cross-border waste flow for recyclables, for disposal. And this slide's really difficult to read, so just what I'd like to do is, up top is the table, active landfills on your left. Actually, the third one down is one that we operate in Taunton, Mass. That has since closed. Thank you. Bethlehem has a short site life associated with it, just a couple more years. But that shows the capacity in 2019, about 5.5 million tons of waste was going to those landfills. If you move down, the waste energy plants, I've got them shown at 100% capacity. That's not really accurate. You can talk to Matt beside me. They probably run 92 to 93% online time. But the point is, the disposal sites, whether it's landfilling or waste energy in New England, is really at capacity. There's no new capacity coming on board. There's sites that are being quote unquote expanded, but they're not adding increased disposal capacity. They're just allowing, those permits allowing those sites to continue to operate. So when you talk about expansion, they're just continuing to operate per se. If you go to the right-hand side of the screen, Tara, and zoom out maybe.
Oh, zoom out, okay. This is a new feature, I've never used this.
Okay, you're doing a good job. So, waste energy plants comprise about 50% disposal capacity in New England. And for example, right now there's Covanta has plants in Massachusetts. They're going through a shutdown, and the Turnkey Facility gets waste that Bedford, New Hampshire is contracted for disposal at Covanta. When that site is down, Covanta, that material is coming to us this week because they have no other outlet. but their contract is with Covanta. So, but that, you know, requirement to move material to the landfills has put those sites, you know, at their operating capacity. And there's no new, as I said, additional capacity coming online. Again, some sites are expanding. I've got 3 of them here that we operate in New England, but they're not adding additional disposal capacity. So that's an important point. Next slide. So here's just a quick snapshot. Turnkey facility, recently permitted, site life to 2034. Crossroads in Norwich Walk, Maine. We've got a permit that's going to keep that site open until 2040. We're pursuing a permit at Fitchburg that's going to add about 6 additional years of life at that facility. And again, these permitting efforts just allow the site to continue to operate, but not adding additional disposal capacity. Next slide. So with this pressure on disposal capacity, here's something that's come out of a recent solid waste management plan for the state of Massachusetts. And it lists a number of companies on the left and efforts that are being made to rail material outside of New England. There's C&D, there's MSW, permitted. A number of these sites are operating. If you zoom out, probably half of those sites are operating currently, and they're moving material to Ohio, Virginia, and Indiana. So because the capacity in New England's not growing, people are moving material outside of the Northeast because there's really not a lot of options that are out there. And we're at a price point for disposal where this makes sense economically. They're charging in Ohio tipping fees of $20 a ton. And it's going to take you $60 a ton, $65, $70 to get it there. So now you're competing with, you know, what it costs to dispose of it in the Northeast. Next slide. So I want to just take a minute to talk about the Turnkey Facility. It's a private landfill. This is a breakdown of the types of waste that facility receives. Municipal solid waste, about 50% of what we take in. Unprocessed construction demolition debris is about 4%. Special waste, that includes ACM, asbestos contaminated material, ashes, biosolid sludges, and miscellaneous special waste. So kind of a grouping of difficult to manage waste streams that are being landfilled. That's about 22% of what we take in. Impacted soils from site cleanups, brownfield redevelopment is about 10%, and alternate daily cover materials, a variety of different things. And some soils that are less impacted, ASR, that's auto shredder residue from recycling of automobiles, and then residuals from construction and demolition processing. So a variety of different things that we take in that are used for, you know, for alternate daily cover materials. Next slide. So if you just look at the MSW, the municipal solid waste portion of it, that 50% is broken down as is shown here on the slide. About half of that, or about 25% of the overall, is received from commercial contractors, folks that it may be Casella, it may be Pennard, it may be Republic, folks that are providing this service to municipalities and commercial entities and bringing that to our facility. The second bullet is direct municipal contracts. We have a contract with the City of Manchester. We have an agreement with, obviously, the City of Rochester, Dover, Somersworth. Those communities we contract with directly. That either comes in directly on collection trucks, or it first goes through a transfer station before it gets to us. Just point in case, we've got a long-term contract with the City of Manchester. To support that contract, this is going back to 1998, we developed the Auburn transfer station. And the reason we did that was to service Manchester, the municipality. So once we got that contract and we had to move that material to Turnkey, you know, that's where that transfer station would go. We also send material from that transfer station to Pennacook when they're down and they need material. We'll send it down to Covanta when their plant's low on volume. So it primarily goes to Turnkey, but it does go to other locations as well. Waste energy plants bypass, I mentioned that briefly. We have a pretty good sized contract with Covanta to provide backup from them. We get some material from wind when they're down or they're going through a shutdown, so that material will go to the landfill. And then recycling plant residuals, MRFs, primarily that's about 5% of what we take in.
Did you say what a MRF is?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's a material recovery facility, recycling plant, if you will. Typically single stream these days, maybe dual stream as well. And again, private haulers may bring that material to us directly, or it may first go through a transfer station. The contracts we have with municipalities vary. Typically it's 3 to 5 years that we'll sign a contract. In some cases it's 20 years. City of Manchester is a good example of that. And Laconia's another one. The Laconia materials going to the Pennacook plant. They had a transfer station that was beyond repair, let me put it that way. They asked us to put a new transfer station in, so we had to say, okay, we've got an investment here. We'll do that, but we need turned out to be like a 12 or 13 year contract. So in that case, that's a longer term contract, but generally it's 3 to 5 years that we'll contract with municipalities for disposal activities. Next slide. So if a city or town is looking for collection disposal service, they'll typically issue an RFP. Private companies like us will present opportunities for recycling aspect, disposal aspect. I know there's a municipality where a number was provided for recycling of their recyclables, and a number was provided for disposal, and it was cheaper, and they're collecting recycling, and right now it's going to disposal, which is unfortunate. But again, to the point that Jim made, economics is driving a lot of things here, and to have a city go back and say, look, we are going to need another $100,000 to manage your recyclables, that's difficult to do. So that's a challenge that some companies have, or municipalities as well. Contracts vary in scope. Some of them are just collection, some are disposal, some of them include transfer station operations. So it is variable what's going on. There's not a straight cookie cutter approach. We've got an agreement with Keene, and we went through long negotiations with Duncan and his crew. But we've settled on agreement, and we're managing the material that's coming out of that transfer station. But it does vary by community. That's why I was surprised to hear that some of the smaller towns don't have an arrangement. I mean, even if you have a small transfer station in town, which is, I think, pretty typical for rural New Hampshire, where they have a transfer station, they don't have curbside collection. Everybody brings their material to the transfer station. It may be a waste management can, it may be zero waste, it could be Casella, Pinot, pick one of them. But I would think that the town would have a contract for services for at least a year or two to get rid of all that material at a set price with some arrangement if the C&D outlet fails. So I was kind of surprised to hear that is the case. Yeah, the fourth bullet down, there may be a situation where a municipality has a contract long-term, and I'm thinking a waste energy plant, because generally they're very capital intensive, and much like the example I gave for the Auburn transfer station, if you're going to build a plant that's going to cost a lot of money, you need a long-term commitment for that. So we may come in and offer a service to a city or a town and say we can take it to Turnkey. Well, they've got an agreement with, let's say, Pennacook as an example. That's where that material has to go. So they just may be looking at transfer capability of operating a transfer station or operating a collection service. They may retain the collection service. Manchester didn't want to give up collection. They wanted to keep that in-house. So they're continuing to do that collection and bring it to our transfer station, and then it takes on from there. And again, sometimes contracts are with the disposal site, but often with third-party haulers. We may sign an agreement with Casella to the material that they're collecting in southern New Hampshire. If they don't want to drive it all the way up north, we'll take some of that at the Auburn transfer station and hopefully it goes to another location. Or it may go to, a burn plant somewhere. Excellent. So, again, just to kind of summarize here, municipalities are looking at typically a couple different approaches here for contractual purposes. They may integrate all services, collection, transfer, and disposal, and recycling in one contract. But more often, what you'll see is that they will bid disposal. And they will go out to other disposal facilities, get pricing, and say, okay, we want our material to go to this facility. Now they go back out to the same group of parties in many cases, folks that have collection and transfer capability, and say, we want a price to bring our material to this location, or wherever that may be. So it's often a multi-step approach, and those municipalities don't always contract directly, with the outlet. May go through a commercial operation. Curbside collection, typically, can be retained by the city. The example I gave on Manchester, or it can be done by commercial haulers being brought to disposal sites. Transfer stations, operations at a larger facility, like in Auburn or Laconia, or they could have containers at small municipal transfer stations, which I think is, looking at the numbers, there's more of those out there, and that's typically what you see happening. And I would think, I learned today, a lot of those towns don't have contracts. That was news to me. And again, just the private sector's folks can vary, or it does vary what services they'll provide. They may only provide a certain service. Some folks, zero waste, may have collection only in an area. They don't have disposal. They'll bring material from a municipality, let's say to the boat transfer station, and it goes to Berlin, or it goes to Turnkey, or it goes somewhere else. So we have contracts with zero waste, for example, we don't, but to take that material into one of our facilities. So there's a lot of variety that's out there relative to where material goes. I think that's all I have. It's not a cookie cutter approach.
Steve, that was really interesting. I have to just say that the slide that really sort of struck me was the rail trail, the rail hauling of material, and the amount of that material that's going out, to Ohio or Indiana. And it strikes me as almost insane that would be a policy that would be both environmentally preferable, economical, and something that we should continue to sustain as a way of managing the waste in the New England region. I mean, I'm just dumbfounded by that, and we just simply have to do better than that.
You're not alone, Duncan, in that feeling. I think everybody in this room feels the same way. What you'll see is, I think every one of those locations is in the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
They've got a policy program in place regarding waste ban items, reducing disposal outlets, what can be developed, what can be expanded, and folks are saying there's no place to go, and any other place that we're going is at capacity, we've got to find an alternative. And it's just being railed somewhere else. You know, in a case like New York City, I get it. You know, you've got, I don't know how many people live in New York City these days, but let's say it's, you know, 13 million people, whatever the number is. You don't have any place to dispose of it unless you put a large waste energy plant there, which isn't going to go over very well probably in the city. That material is railed out. There's 7,000 tons a day that's being railed out in the city. But in a case like Massachusetts, it's just a reaction to the limited outlets for materials today. And that's a partial list of a couple that have been added to that application. And I mean, Hartford, Connecticut, the Mirror plant, the waste energy plant, they needed $300 million to redo that plant, and the state legislature said, not going to happen, find something else to do with it. So they're looking at either railing or trucking that material. It won't be railed to Pennsylvania. They're looking at trucking it to Pennsylvania. And at 420,000 tons a day, I did the math, it was something crazy, like 156 trucks every day had to be on the road to move this material from Hartford to a landfill in Pennsylvania. I mean, you can talk about greenhouse gases, I get it, I don't disagree with that, I think it's foolish. But just logistically, we run transfer stations and long haul's a problem. Try to get 156 trucks on the road every single day. Bad weather, people calling in, it's a problem. And I see that as a real good example of a failed alternative or solution that's being proposed.
Well, it reminds me of back, I mean, a lot of you will probably remember the Mobro garbage barge that sailed around well, almost around the world in search of a home, and it's almost like we've got the same thing happening in kind of slow motion now. But the good news about the Mobro situation was that it really raised awareness, and I think that, you know, as we get greater awareness, you know, with more people involved, looking at, you know, how we manage things, and, you know, I recognize, I mean, you know, the city of Keene is beholden to working as a partner with Waste Management because we have no alternative in order how to get rid of our trash. You know, we can't do it alone, and Waste Management frankly can't do it alone. So that it really needs a collective effort to change the status quo in a meaningful way.
Well, and it goes back to what Jim said. It's just really complicated.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, I think there's so many economic drivers, and you need the political will to kind of come together. And that's why we can make I mean, I keep thinking we can make a lot of recommendations, but ultimately it's going to come down to what happens in the legislature and, you know, what support there is there. So Steve, I actually had a question. Like, I remember when China stopped taking our single stream, and actually what sort of brought me to creating that study committee in the first place was the problems that the municipalities were having. So if they had contracts with you, but then they were but they were very much affected by what was happening with China. So how did that all work? Like, I remember municipalities coming in and saying, well, we have a contract, but now our tipping fees are skyrocketing. I mean, is there variability in these contracts on what you charge for tipping fees and processing single stream? I just wondered how all that contracting worked.
In the past there wasn't, but today there is. We try to do that to protect us because we took it on the chin for a couple of years, and we had a contract, and you had to honor that contract. So we did that, and when the contract expired, we now built in commodity pricing variability, looking at the yellow sheet, what does this stuff cost, and what's the difference to that? If that goes up, as a generator, as a municipality, you get paid more. If it goes down, you know, there's going to be a cost. There's a cost. So we provide protection on our side, and arguably, you know, there's risk. We're sharing the risk, and that's really what the problem is. That whole thing with China has subsided. I think we're not going to China anymore. I don't think anyone's going to China. I may be wrong there, but you know, there are other outlets. A lot of domestic mills are being developed with
as-
paper plants in Maine,
Right.
that'd be,
Right.
not dragging.
I mean, as long as somebody's doing it.
But, you know, it's domestically it's being processed, and frankly, that's why I mentioned this other, company that we're involved in, continuous materials. We're saying, okay, are there other things that we can do with this versus just the standard recycling activities and other repurposing of these materials? So that's why we got involved with this company. So, particularly for the difficult to manage materials, but that challenge is behind us. There's other challenges out there every single day relative to recycling markets, but China's subsiding.
And for the plastic packaging that has multiple layers, there's really not much to do with it but throw it away, right?
I think a lot of the problems, the materials that we're purchasing, just unknowingly, right? You want this product, so you buy the product, but the container, you look at some of these things, it's like, okay, there's 3 or 4 different materials in this. There's no way that's going to be recycled, So that's part of the problem. It's got to go back to the folks that are generating this packaging and trying to make it more recycler friendly, let's say.
Well, in one of the discussions we had at the study committee, I had somebody that was a manufacturer of these plastic containers come in, and we were talking about sort of the coming together of the companies that needed the packaging, the people producing the packaging, and then the marketing arm. Because the marketing arm has a role to play in there too, and it just, so nothing's simple.
Oh, no,
And it'd be nice to sort of have a meeting of the minds there to maximize the sustainability of the packaging, which then people go to class, and it, anyway. All right, any other questions?
One quick other point.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about economics, and of course, in a municipality, we make, so many of our decisions economically based, but I think that, we shortchange ourselves in how we look at economics because we don't consider a lot of things which I would refer to as environmental externalities when we're doing the mass balance equation of how something arrives at a best decision. We often leave out a lot of things that are inconvenient truths to ourselves, and I think that it's incumbent upon us through this committee to make sure that those things come up as we analyze what may be our best solution or our policy proposals considering these types of things, whether it's climate change or, in the case of Stonyfield, glass versus plastic. I mean, I remember when I did a study a long time ago when I first had kids, I started looking at disposable versus cloth diapers. And, as anybody who's ever gone into that wormhole realizes, it's not that simple. And frankly, I ended up arriving at disposables because of the energy use required to heat the water up to a certain temperature to sanitize a cloth diaper, et cetera, et cetera. It was complicated. So there's nothing simple in this, but I want to make sure that we at least all understand that there's a greater economic equation that probably needs to be considered as we look at things.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate that comment because that's why we were formed. And I think a lot of people, I just was talking to Brian on the way in here. He said, the thing with solid waste, it seems to go like this, that people are either not paying attention or everybody's paying attention. And I think we're at, and everybody's paying attention, or a lot of people are paying attention moment. And I think we should all feel the responsibility of being here and trying to put forth good ideas and hope that the legislature listens to us. I had asked, Steve, but then Matt.
Let the man go through.
Yeah.
Just one question. I agree with all that, what's been said, but I would just, instead of throwing everything on the wall, I think we should look at if there's anything out there relative to low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
We should focus on that first to make an impact, okay? Food waste, just
Right.
talk about that real quick, right? There's challenges in collecting and managing that, but that's a pretty good percentage of the MSW versus, no offense, plastic bags, okay? I know that's your thing, but that's a very...
It's not my thing.
They're very
Oh,
low.
I wanted I introduced a bill so that they could be collected, that was all. But, that again was China and they were messing up your MRFs.
I know, they sure were, and they still are. But, from a tonnage standpoint, we're not gonna be able to measure that, right? So, I just want to throw that out.
So just want to touch on, from the waste to energy side, I mean, the waste that we receive is all coming from communities that have recycling programs. So we're seeing what's left over from what's been removed for recycling has been removed for recycling. We receive what's left over. You know, we take that, we produce energy with that. We also recover, amazingly enough, as much recycling of metal happens, it's mind-boggling how much metal is still in the trash once we put it through our process. You know, we'll recover 5,000 tons of metal at one facility a year. We'll also recover, 1,000 tons, 1,500 tons of aluminum from that same waste stream. So even with all the value of metal today, it's still amazing how much it just gets passed through. So I guess it gets to the quality of the recycling and the ability of the communities to operate that is really going to impact what we see. So we're getting what's left over. Can you throw that slide back up that Steve had?
Which one?
There was the rail transfer.
The one that was just done?
Yeah. So our company's really transformed over the past few years. We've gone from just traditional waste to energy facilities to we are in the rail transfer business. We are in the energy business in Ohio. But we're also one of the facilities on there is the United Materials Management in Leominster. So that facility's been operating since late 2020 as a C&D transfer and an MSW transfer rail served facility. We've installed a C&D processing line in that same building. It started up back in January. So now we're processing the C&D, we're recovering the wood. We also do that at our facility in Millbury. One issue we've run into is so there's a big shift in Massachusetts to recover more of the recyclable wood, recyclable materials from the C&D stream. The wall we run into is outlets for that material. So right now, really there's one facility that accepts the wood waste, the recovered wood waste, the clean wood, and they produce wood products, furniture, desks, what have you. If they have problems, then it sort of backs the whole system up. So in addition to having good recycling, you talk about infrastructure, it's having more places to send the material that we're recovering. That will help drive that. So because we'll be faced with having to shut our facility down because we're at capacity on the floor without being able to send material, process it, and send it out. So and that just backs up the whole system. And Steve knows what I'm talking about. Another shift in the use of the existing facilities that we have is really focusing on rail shipping off the residuals from the processing, the post-recycling, the post-C&D processing, versus trying to do some kick sorting on the floor at a facility. We redirect it to another facility nearby, and then the residuals come back and get shipped out. But again, we're at the mercy of the rail. So when it works, it works. When it doesn't, you could have missed switches, cars don't get picked up. Again, you start reducing the capacity. So it's a very complicated animal to manage. So
I want to jump on what Matt just said right there. That's great. That number's what, 10,000 tons a day, and that's not quite up to date. We've got Leominster here seeking approval. It's been up and operating for a couple of years, so that one entry, this is from the state DEP. But if there's a problem with moving that material out on the outlet side, cars don't get returned, whatever it may be, stuff backs up. Now you don't have a place to put that in New England. That's the problem. Not to say that this doesn't play a part in managing waste somehow, but an over-reliance on this is a problem, and it's gonna backfire on the state of Massachusetts. So anyway, enough said.
What happens politically when things change in Ohio? And they say.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I get sick of it.
It's interesting. You would think there would be a lot of pushback because a lot of this material is going to Ohio, in Indiana now. But there was an EBC presentation or something. I think folks might have been on it, and materials going to New York State. We had somebody from Virginia, and we had somebody from Ohio EPA, and it was like, we've got all the capacity you want, just take it to us, no problem. This was a state regulator. Question was asked, what does the legislature say? And they said, cite more sites because we've got capacity, we'll take it in, which is totally different from what you see in the Northeast. And that's where.
But that's how China was.
I know.
Sooner or
Right.
later.
An over-reliance on one thing is going to come back.
trying to encourage infrastructure so you can handle what waste you still have in the state. And they basically said, that's really not something we're focusing on. So I mean, I do think that as a state, we want to make sure we at least have enough capacity for ourselves,
Right.
and not try and go the whole other direction.
They really rely on industry to sort of find a niche for whatever they have that they're pulling out. That's really not trying to, they're trying to create markets by banning materials from being disposed of. And, you know, composting, you know, food waste or whatever, you know, trying to do that on a small scale is difficult. I mean, if it was so valuable, you know, you'd have places for the stuff to go. I mean, you don't see gold bars sitting on the side of the road for good reason, because it's got a value to that. So, trying to, again, getting back to the infrastructure, it's you kind of have to build something to have it be a business somebody wants to get into, but then, you know, it's a chicken and egg thing
Right.
all the way around. So,
Mattress disposal in Massachusetts is no longer allowed, and the capacity to recycle mattresses is
Yeah.
here, and this is how many mattresses they're generating. So what's happening with those mattresses? They're going there, and they're going to Ohio. You know, I mean, eventually that capacity hopefully will get expanded, but there's just not a lot of alignment with where the need is and what the infrastructure that's needed to support, you know, the policies and regulations.
Well, and I think some things are coming here too.
Yep.
Yeah, not just Ohio.
Right.
So that, and you know, anyways, I wanted to ask you, Matt, the energy you produce, does that go? Who gets that? Is that like EverSource, or
So
how does that work?
we originally, when the facilities were sited, they had long-term power contracts with the EverSources of the world. Now the power, after 20 or 30 years, those agreements run out, and we're merchant plants. We bid into the ISO New England grid, or wherever we are, you know, up and on the East Coast, and we bid in with so many megawatts for the next day, and then ISO New England sets that price based on the demand, and it's really interesting. If it's a really cold day or a really hot day, jump on the ISO New England website. There's the real-time price in the market, and they show the demand and they show what's available, and it's just fascinating to watch this trend go up and down during the day. But long answer to a short question. So it goes into the grid, and ISO New England manages it from there. So we don't send all our power to Concord. It just supports the function of the grid.
And then after you do the burn, the residuals you landfill.
That's right.
Right, because I remember you talking about that.
Yep. So after it comes out of the boiler, after producing electricity, we have a 80 to 90% volume reduction of what went in, and then we have post processing recycling for ferrous and non-ferrous metals. There's been a number of projects over the years to try to look at reuse of that ash. It could be used as an aggregate, could be used in concrete, could be used in road base, but that really hasn't taken off. I think because there's plentiful materials to make asphalt and concrete. In Europe, that's a different story, where they'll actually take the bottom ash and they'll make a aggregate out of it. So it's a big focus over there because they're limited in the materials. Depending on where you are in Europe, it has more. They do more of it than less of it. I mean, the UK recently went through a big growth in waste to energy disposal, where the government actually fostered the developments, and they have that sort of same process where they'll recover the residuals for reuse at the end. So.
Matt, does your company qualify through your burn plants? Do they qualify for RECs?
Yes.
Renewable energy credits,
Yeah.
RECs.
Okay. All right. I just want to say, as far as composting and low-hanging fruit, that probably is my thing. But anyway, you can divert 20 to 25% of your weight from the landfill if you can get your composting going. So the composting regs are they effective?
They are effective.
All right, so the revised composting regs are effective, and it should loosen things up for new composting sites within the state of New Hampshire. And I just getting back to what Reagan said said, I just think it's a really important point that people understand that transfer stations are already authorized to take food scraps. So if a transfer station in town wants to start collecting food scraps for composting and then they want to contract out for somebody to take the food scraps to actually do the composting, they're already authorized to do that. And I know we're talking about it in New London, but right away the issue comes to administration of it and where you're going to collect it, and you know, again, it gets back to economics. So, but I do think that food scraps is someplace that we can keep looking.
And once again, it all comes down to Duncan's comments is we need infrastructure.
Right.
You know, as a border town in northern New Hampshire, it's amazing how many burn barrels in Vermont there are because there's not the infrastructure up there to do stuff. And it's horrible, and that's what New Hampshire needs.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, I thought we'd have like a 5-minute seventh inning stretch here, and then I think we have some work we've really got to do when we come back. If we're going to put together subcommittees, if that's what we decided we want to do, we've got to figure out what they are. And DES has come up with some ideas to kick it off. We may want to add one, expand one, whatever. And I know the Director Wimsat will sort of kick that off when we come back. So let's see, what time is it? I mean, let's not take much more than 5 minutes, because we got to get done by 12. And I'm going to ask Director Wimsat to sort of kick this discussion off on the subcommittees. Just as a reminder, we kind of decided that this was what we were going to do so that we could maybe be a little more nimble and move more quickly and be more supportive to the department. So in the development of the long-range plan, and just to try to get some creative thinking going. So, Mr. Director, if you want to sort of kick it off.
Sure, thank you, Representative Eagle. So, good morning, everybody. As you may recall, at the last meeting, we had a weather problem and we couldn't come together, so we weren't able to make official decisions. So this is really the meeting where we can talk about these subcommittees and decide what we want to do, make official decision about establishing subcommittees, and we'll talk about how they'll actually do their work. Just to back up though a little bit, you know, as far as this working group's, you know, mission, the most important thing in my view that this working group is going to do in the next 6 months is to provide guidance and real participation in the development of a state solid waste plan, which is due to be published October 1, and we will meet that deadline. So we've got a lot of work to do in a relatively short period of time here, and as we talked about this with the chair, we really figured that it was really going to be important to kind of divide and conquer here, have a few subcommittees that would focus on some specific topics that we know need to be in the content of the state solid waste plan, and have those subcommittees meet and develop some materials, come back and report to the working group, and then, you know, provide that really direct guidance to the agency as it works to draft the plan. And we will, you know, certainly we, you know, Leah Damaris or Leah McKenna at the last meeting, you know, talked a little bit about what the current plan looks like and what we're envisioning moving forward. And what we hope to do in the coming weeks is to get you a little bit more of a draft framework for that, so that you can have something to kind of shoot for as you're doing your work. But I wanted to talk about the specific subcommittee ideas that we came up with. We talked with the chair and amongst ourselves here in the agency, and came up with a few ideas for some subcommittee topics. Three of them I'll just outline briefly. The first one is waste reduction and management of difficult waste. So obviously the first, you know, the best that we can do to try to reduce our need for disposal capacity and management alternatives for waste is to avoid generating waste in the first place. So there are certainly a lot of opportunities to advance source reduction in our work, and we think that the subcommittee focused on that, along with a sort of corollary issue of, you know, figuring out how to manage difficult to manage waste. You know, Steve Plutchie just mentioned the mattress, bulky waste. and things like contaminated soils, C&D fines. Those are wastes that have always posed disposal problems and challenges here in the state and really everywhere. So we thought that that subcommittee could also look at those issues. The second subcommittee topic was regarding the traditional recycling and composting, and trying to figure out where the gaps in our infrastructure. What is it we can and can't do right now? How do we advance those things moving forward? Because again, we can say, as other states have done, we can ban organics from landfills. But if we don't have infrastructure that can realistically and cost effectively manage those, then we're going to end up with a crisis on our hands with regard to, we've got a ban, but then we don't have any place to bring these things. So trying to figure out what kind of opportunities would be available for that, what we can do to encourage the development of that. And I think in all of this, it's important to recognize that municipalities, local governments, and private sector really drive how we and determine how wastes are managed in the state. The state, New Hampshire DES has never come to itself and applied for a landfill permit or a materials recovery facility permit. That's not our mission. That's not what we do. We certainly have an important role in helping to advance those things. But at the end of the day, we're a permitting authority, and we react to the facility proposals that come to us. So we need to talk about how are we going to create an environment and circumstances where those kinds of facilities and those applications for those facilities are going to come to the agency for consideration. And then the third topic is alternate waste management technologies. So it's been a lot of talk, rightfully, about the solid waste hierarchy and the fact that there are technologies that are higher up on the hierarchy than landfilling or waste energy and incineration. And how do we advance those alternate technologies? In my role, a lot of times a lot of people come and talk to us about these alternate technologies, and then I'll just ask a simple question and say, well, yeah, great, let's talk about it. And say, can you give me an example where it's working? And then, a lot of times we get, well, we don't quite have it. I can't show you a facility anywhere in the region. And so the question is, how do we get those things advanced? We know that those alternate technologies are beginning to be cited in various places in the Northeast, and we want to make sure that we can see that happening in New Hampshire as well. So that subcommittee would look at those particular issues. Those are the three ideas we came up with. They're by no means, it's really up to this working group to decide what those are going to look like. Some people may have ideas for an additional subcommittee, or maybe changing the description or the scope of one of these subcommittees. And I think that's kind of the conversation we want to have today. I will just take a moment to tell you about logistics, because obviously, what we're going to need a few things. We're going to need folks here on the working group who are willing to provide some additional effort to participate in a subcommittee, which means these subcommittees will have their own meetings. We would anticipate for just efficiency and the ability to do it. Understand that by creating these subcommittees, when this work group votes to do that, the subcommittees themselves are basically public bodies that are subject to the right to know law. So the subcommittee can't just form a group and say, oh, let's have a telephone conference all together on such and such a date. Their meetings have to be posted and noticed, and we see just realistically for those things to happen in a way that we can manage. DES will provide the support and sort of the administrative support to those subcommittee meetings, but we see those happening in person. We're just not going to be able to, we're not going to have the bandwidth to provide a remote participation or viewing opportunity for the public for those, because we just, with 3 or more subcommittees meeting frequently, plus this meeting, plus all the other meetings we're trying to help support, we just can't provide that. I wish we could. It would be nice if we could, but I don't think we can do that. So realistically, what I think will happen is a subcommittee of, 4 or 5 people from the working group will decide when they want to meet, and then we will help notice that, and then provide a location here at the agency to hold that meeting, or if the group wants to meet somewhere else, that's fine too. We just need to know where that is and make sure that we get it noticed so that the public, to the extent they want to participate or come and observe, has an opportunity to do that. So that's a lot all at once, but I thought that was a way to sort of
As far
As
as the
the
notification, is it 1 week before? Do you remember what the?
It's either a week or 10 days. It might be 10 days.
Yeah, it might be 10 days. Well, I mean, now's the time we really need to talk about this as a group. I don't know what you think about these proposals, if you think you're missing something. I know, I had talked a little bit to Mark Morgan. He thought maybe we would wanna have one that's more focused, on regulatory aspects, on funding aspects, whether those sorts of issues would evolve from the discussions within subcommittees like this, I don't know. And I guess the other thing I would say is if we create these, and as the director said, if we want to expand them, if we want to have another one, if we finish and we want to, I mean, it's really within our control what we want to do. But as he also said, it's up to us to put in the extra effort to get it done. So I don't, and I guess the only other thing I'd ask you, at some point, pretty soon, we'll have some sort of draft to dig into a little bit more,
Yeah,
right? Of the plan.
Draft may be a strong, I think it'll be at least an outline that we'll see what we envision for the structure of the plan. I do want to mention too, sometimes there's a tendency to kind of overblow these things.
Right.
The real focus of these, this is not to solve all these problems. We're not, we don't expect the subcommittee to have 3 or 4 meetings and then come back with a solution. This is really to do just the real purpose of these subcommittees is, for now, for the next 6 months anyways, is to inform the development of the plan. So in a way, it's, if I always tell my kids, is everyone in this house is good at identifying problems, but we're not always that good at solving them. So that's really all we're asking to do is identify the problem and maybe some approaches or strategies for solving it. We're not looking to solve it in 6 months, and we're not going to. But so I think if we keep that in mind, that the sort of work scope for these subcommittees is pretty focused. And I'm not sure that they need to have more than 3 or 4 meetings and then come up with recommendations to inform the development of the plan. So I just sometimes I think we have a tendency to kind of overblow these things and make the seeming mission of the subcommittee so imposing that nobody wants to participate. And I don't think that we should.
Well, and we're creating them, we control them, and I think we should expect flexibility. I mean, as I thought about it too, the subcommittees could also do a little more research on issues like this that the department wouldn't be able to do in developing plans and looking at different alternatives. I mean, I think when Massachusetts was here, they had even hired a consultant to do a lot of work with them. So, anyways, with all of that said, let me put it this way. You don't all have to tell me which ones you might like to be on today, but I really would like to get a discussion going about the committees themselves and what you think of this proposal or anything you want to add. Steve?
Yeah, can I ask what we expect committees to come out? I mean, if it's something that Mike and his group can use in the plan that's due in October, we've got a short timeline to produce something that may or may not be incorporated. What do we want to have? And I guess maybe we should, say that all these committees should come up with A, B, and C, so that they're all structured, the findings similarly, so you can use them in some fashion if you choose to or not. Maybe you can, since Mike, you're spearheading that plan, tell us what you need so that we can pull together supporting information that they can use that is constructive.
Right. Well, in other words, what would be the best form of a product that we would feed back to you, right?
Yeah.
But I think on the slide, it kind of sort of says what you're looking for a product, saying exploring the opportunities. I would think that if we listed what the opportunities were, at least framing it in that way. I mean, whether it solves any problems specifically, but at least it starts to frame the issues. It seems like a reasonable product out of each one of the subcommittees. Here's what we explored. Here's what we think may be possible and worthy of further exploration.
Yeah, I think that's right, Duncan. I think that it may be different for the different. So I understand your desire to have kind of a standard framework for each subcommittee. But I think that really, as those committees meet and identify where, challenges in that particular sector, coming up with strategies for what the agency, working with its partners, could do over that 10-year period of the plan to try to advance that issue more directly. And in many cases, I think probably we're going to see a frequent common theme is going to be legislation.
Right.
For this to happen, this is, this kind of legislation would be helpful to advance that. It could be related to outreach, so I think if you look at, maybe that's laying it out. What are are there any legislative changes that need to be made to advance this, and what are they? Are there specific outreach activities that the agency or its partners could participate in to advance this particular issue? Are there, incentives? One of the things that has been in play at various times in the legislature, it's not really in play right now, is the idea that a lot of these other states that have made more progress in advancing alternate technologies or diversion approaches have had incentive grants, that administered by the state to help incentivize new facilities or advancement of new approaches. And so I think that for some things that kind of thing might be true, and that could be a recommendation to try to advance that. For other things, it might not really be relevant. I like your idea of trying to get a standard work product, but I'm not sure I'm arriving at it just yet.
Thanks, Mike. I had a similar. I went through your report, and I came up with 4 categories. 3 of them more or less were this, and I also had one policy and legislation that never showed up here. Mark had the same comment, but I think what Mike just said is probably a better idea. Let's focus on these 3, and then what comes out of that is, and maybe there's regulatory changes, maybe there's outreach, maybe there's legislation. So that last committee that I thought may be a good one, maybe everyone who's doing this, after they work through it, come up with a suggestion or recommendation as to maybe how to affect change or how to move the ball forward. So that may be one of the goals.
Well, and I agree, because it's hard to know what legislation you need until you've got the ideas, right? You sort of narrow them down. But I would say in exploring alternatives, if you're looking at what other states are doing, it might also sort of bring in what they've done legislatively as part of your discussion, so that you don't just come out with a lot of ideas and then the legislative piece has to be developed. Try to do a little bit in tandem. That's sort of what you were talking about too, Reagan, I
That was
think.
my feedback when I heard this idea about
Yeah.
the legislative group. I thought, well, isn't that the product, one of the products coming out of each of these committees is trying to think up what are some things that we could actually recommend that might meaningfully improve these.
And I think, just sort of as an overarching thing as well, we have our diversion goals, right? That's what's driving a lot of this. We want to try to reach our diversion goals by 2030 or even earlier, if we can. So do people like that? I'm so thankful because I was really stressing about what we were going to come up with for subcommittees, and I'm really thankful to you folks for sort of outlining this. Do people like this idea? Do you see ones that you're really eager to serve on? Any other concepts?
Well, I just wonder, we just heard a little bit about capacity, and I think Mike just indicated that there hasn't been a history of the department applying for its own permit. And where does sort of capacity get addressed in these groups?
Well, I think that was one of the things that Mark had been talking about, this whole issue about landfilling, diversion from landfills, alternatives to. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. I hate to have these groups and then we're missing kind of a big problem.
I think the answer to your question is that capacity is not addressed in those subcommittees.
It's not.
As they're laid out. Correct.
I think that, you know, I was just thinking the other day about, we heard from Vermont and Maine that had, you know, state-run and owned landfills last, you know, that remote meeting. And so when you just said, you know, you've never applied for your own permit, you know, I'd been wondering if there was a history of that in the state and that thinking.
Well, before I answer that question, I'll modify my answer. That does address capacity, but alternate types of capacity.
Sure,
Not,
yes.
not just,
Yeah.
the sort of overarching discussion for so long now when we talk about capacity, it's considered to be synonymous with disposal capacity. But really what we should be looking at is waste management capacity, which can take a lot of different forms other than just ultimate disposal in a landfill or a waste management facility. So, but your second question, our view of the concept of a state-run facility or something like that is that absent a directive from the legislature to propose that, there's nothing in the statute that sort of directs us to do that. I mean, obviously, if the legislature passed a law tomorrow that said, come back to us with a proposal for a state-run facility, that's one of the things we'd be working on. But at present, we've not seen that kind of a directive.
I was just wondering, because those states seem to be so different than where we are.
So I was just thinking, you still have to finish the biennial report, right? Did Mike finish that? Well, because that talks a lot about what's being collected, permitting capacity, or I mean, would that be helpful as a data source? Because one of the things, if you're talking capacity, is understanding what exists, what might exist.
Yeah, no, that, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure where that's at in terms of being ready for final print, but we'll report on that for
I
the
mean,
next
that would
meeting.
help generate data.
It would definitely be a source.
Just something that's already in the system.
So one question I have, our solid waste management plan that we're working on, is that only addressing waste that's produced in New Hampshire? Or is that addressing waste that's produced and coming in to New Hampshire?
It's actually, a summary of it is right up on that screen, the previous couple of pages.
I'm just trying to make sure I have my head around it.
Right, yeah.
Because when you talk about capacity, certainly imported solid waste is a major component of what our capacity is.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a discussion that's been starting in the, last 6 weeks or so, this issue of New Hampshire capacity versus regional capacity.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is that that's the current state solid waste plan really talks mostly about providing capacity for waste generated here in the state, as well as a host of other issues. And I think that's probably a topic for this working group to look at as we develop this state plan. Is how do we address that topic of out-of-state waste? And what role does it have in the plan, or even in just the work of the committee?
Well, it's certainly been a major topic in the legislature within my committee this year, most of us. And that's why I sort of wanted to understand what we were exactly trying to do. I mean, we talk about needs for legislation, that's certainly a big piece of it.
Would it make sense to think about separating the waste reduction from the hard to manage items and putting the hard to manage items under a new committee that's focusing on disposal?
Could you back up to the summary of the committees? I mean, I think it's a good point. We've really got to dive into this capacity issue in some way. I mean, I know, like, for instance, SB 380, Senator Hennessy's bill just passed out of the Senate, and it added a couple of responsibilities. I mean, it still has to get through the House and everything, but it added a couple of responsibilities to our group because we didn't have enough to do. But I think a lot of the issues we would have been looking at anyway, so I don't have a problem with it. But one is this development of a tighter solid waste management plan by municipalities to determine what can be put in landfills. and I know they already have to prepare plans, this, you know, people are talking about looking at them and maybe following the Vermont model. And then the other thing was looking at the creation of a site evaluation committee for landfill placement. And I just mentioned that because those are things that are being discussed. It's hard to know exactly where they would fit in the framework that we have there. Not that we have to cover it just because it was in that bill, but I'm just saying those are different creative solutions that we have to find a home for, I think, because they're already being discussed.
I think some of these topics are going to be covered in a study committee, House Bill 1049, that is created, assuming it survives the Senate. It's going to interact with a lot of the same topics that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to, I mean, you're going to summarize them anyway, but do you want to just talk about, like, one of them was looking at landfill siting, like public benefit,
All of that.
like extended producer responsibility, but the report is due, what, like November
I think it's November
1st?
1st, yeah.
I mean, that is a really hefty amount of stuff
It
to,
is.
having run a study committee in the time period after the governor has signed the bill, it really gets tight. Anyway, I say all of that just because I'm trying to figure out where those things fit here.
And to just kind of dovetail off of what you were saying, Senator Evil, or Representative Evil.
Representative.
Sorry, Representative Evil.
Right, Howard?
You don't want
Sorry.
No,
that.
no.
You know, we're in all of the solid waste rules. We need to have discussions. This is certainly not low-hanging fruit, but when we're going to start talking about infectious waste and regulated medical waste rules, because those are really need updating as well. So that's not something that's come up in our conversations yet, but that is a topic that we should.
Yeah, I mean, one positive thing about this, we have a very short-term assignment that we've got to complete here
Right.
by October 1. But this working group is established for a 5-year period. So
Right.
there's a lot of ground that it can and will cover following publishing of that plan. So we're sort of focused on it. But I think certainly incorporating those kinds of things into the plan and making it clear that that's something that, you know, to the extent that there's something that needs to work that needs to be done on that, it makes sense to absolutely be raising that as an issue for the plan.
I mean, I don't necessarily consider that low-hanging fruit, but in some ways it is, because if we, like under difficult waste, if we really zero in and at some point on that issue and it's just like this glaring thing that needs to be handled, I mean, that would be a recommendation that we could make right out of the blocks, depending. And that's partially why you're here on the working group. So, anyways.
Do you see these subcommittees surviving the initiation of or the implementation of the solid waste plan in October? Do you see these continuing beyond that? Remind me again, Director, once we've established that plan, when does it need to be updated again?
We'll have a 10-year, the statute will be required to be updated 10 years after.
Okay.
So, but, you know, in a better, you know, we're getting to a point where we hope that our bureau is going to be better resourced and have more resources, personnel to focus on planning. I could see us, you know, making that plan something that we amend periodically when we see there's a particular component that needs to be addressed. So it would need statutorily to be updated 10 years after publishing, but it could be, I would see it as a living document that could continue to be updated on a more frequent basis.
So if we continued on with these subcommittees and the working group for the 5 years, there's nothing to say we couldn't continue to make changes to it as we went.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we can change the subcommittees too, you know, but I think we're sort of in this crunch now where we're trying to generate whatever information we can for the agency. So, I mean, I haven't heard anybody say the capacity thing, maybe we could start here and then we could, but I think it's something that we can't
It seems
lose
like such
track
a large
of.
issue, you know, that
Right.
doesn't
And-
really get hit on right here.
Well, and the other thing is we're going to continue to meet as a full group, and so, you know, I'm always thinking about trying to put together a meaningful agenda for you guys when we come together. So, you know, I'm happy to take your suggestions as far as what else you want to hear about. I mean, it's a balancing act between how much discussion we want to have and how many presentations we want to have and what the presentation should be. So, you know, I think as Director Wimsatt knows, I have a lot of angst about what we're having on our agenda for you guys from month to month.
Can I ask, would it make sense or would it be possible if we kept our monthly meeting schedules that we've already got? And would it be possible if we've got 3 different committees and no one's on multiple committees? And I don't know if that makes sense. And we could all come here, meet in 3 different rooms potentially from 9:30 to, you know, 11. And then we can all come here for the remainder of that time for a group meeting, and maybe each committee can report out and we can discuss. I mean, how many more presentations do we need versus us digging into these subjects?
Well, I had a thought about that too, like maybe some of the subcommittees could meet the day that we would have a regularly scheduled meeting. I mean, it's not set in stone that it's 9:30 to 12 either. I mean, we could expand it a little bit, but, I mean, anyway, you were gonna say something.
Well, I think that Reagan's idea is a great one. You know, we could do just, I'm trying to think of it logistically. What if we said that the subcommittees will meet from 9 to 10 on solid waste work group meeting days, and then the whole group can meet from 10 to noon or whatever, however we want to break it up, maybe 90 minutes and 90 minutes. But I think that I'm trying to realize that people have very busy lives, and you know, if you got this meeting, if at least you can fit it all into one meeting, that might, into one morning, that might be a little more attractive. And the other thing I would just in terms of want to make it attractive to serve on one of these subcommittees, I think the primary focus of these subcommittees right now is to inform our development of the state solid waste plan. So I think you only have to sign up for a 6-month pitch. If you don't want to stay on it, you can quit. But and I think I also would see these groups be very autonomous, and that, you know, the group gets together as a subcommittee, and they want to meet on a different day, or they want to, whatever it is they want to do, they should feel like they have the ability to do that. They're going to be autonomous units, as I would envision it, who would then come back and report to the group when they've got something they want to share. Is that consistent
Yeah.
with your
Okay, anybody else have any other thoughts? So why don't we stick with this 3 outline? I'd like to ask that you tell me, I mean, let's just say, tell me by next Wednesday, whatever day that is, what committees you'd be like super excited to serve on. So it'd be
super excited?
yeah, super excited. So, and if you know today, you can tell us today, but anyway, so that would be the 30th. If you could let me know by the 30th. Let's stick with our April 25th time period. Depending on who signs up for what, if maybe you wanted to meet in a couple of weeks, we could probably do that, and see what happens. I mean, the idea, I don't think that the agency can support, or I know that they can't support each of these subcommittees. So, you know, what you generate is self-generated. You know what I'm saying? And if you want to have somebody come in and talk to you, you can do that. I mean, however you guys want to do it. Does that make sense? Huh?
What was April 25th?
So we have, it may not be the 25th, I'm sorry, it's whatever the 4th Friday is. 22nd. Well,
22nd
is it?
I think that's in fact birthday.
Birthday. Well, how topical. Sorry, we've had so many 25th meetings, so.
Okay.
All right, whatever the 4th Friday is. And honestly, if somebody wants to get going before that, as long as we have a room to meet and we meet the notice requirements.
Right, and I do want to be clear, we will provide the administrative support, so if you need a room, we'll get you a room and a person to help me, you know, make sure everybody gets signed in, and we'll certainly provide that.
But you won't be
support.
taking the minutes and all
I
that
just,
kind
we
of stuff.
can't
No, you
commit to
can't.
that at this point, but
So the 4th Friday is the 22nd, huh?
How about the donuts, Mike?
I mean, would it, we don't have to have it the 20th, would it make sense to have it the 29th to give us a little more breathing room? extra week. I mean, I think everybody has the 22nd on the calendar already.
Yeah.
We'll just stick with that.
I mean, does everyone already know what committee they want to serve on if they're going to do it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you
Do you
do,
not wanna-
if you do.
you can sign me up for recycling and composting.
Okay. I don't know.
I'm just wondering if we're going to have a committee that no one wants to serve on it. Do we want to deal with that issue now? That's my only concern. Is if we don't.
Is there anybody that wants to think about it more, or do you already know what ones you want to do? All right.
Put me down for the first one.
Okay. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, Reagan, you're number 2.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. And then Steve, you're number.
1.
Did you say?
Anybody else?
Okay.
You can put me or Susanna Smith down for number 2.
All right. Greg? Poor number 3.
I'm gonna take number 3.
Oh, go Matt. All right.
Somebody else goes with me.
Me too. I'm in 3.
All
You're
right.
in 3? Okay. This is like picking softball teams.
Right.
So Eric is online. Go ahead, Eric.
Hi, I'll go on number 3 as well.
Oh, okay. All right, let's see. Jim.
I think UNH is the best fit for 3 also, so we'll
Okay.
go there.
All right.
Alternatives.
2, please.
Good idea. Okay, well,
I can do 2.
who hasn't said? Howard.
I'm sorry, I was doing my homework. Since I'm a co-sponsor on 367, which is about alternative waste management technology, I'll probably
like
jump on that. I just don't know what my ability will be for time as we
Yeah,
get to summer.
I get it.
But I will certainly help all that I can.
Okay. I think that's everybody here. And I'll stick to the.
Mornings are
Huh?
difficult for me in the summer.
Yeah,
when I
well,
get-
I mean, I think we'll just all have to figure it
Right.
out. Right.
Once I start harvest with the farm, mornings are really difficult.
Are hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring your fellow committee members in.
Yeah. Wait, so Greg, you're number 1? So I just wanna make sure that I have this. So, number 1, I've got Steve, Heather, Greg. Number 2, I have Reagan, Susanna Smith, Adam, and Brian. Number 3, I have Matt. Now it ended up, it was the most popular. Matt, Duncan, Eric, Jim, and Howard.
You wrote Heather. It's
I
Frida.
know, I'm Frida, I'm sorry. Why did I say Heather? Okay, I'm not sure where I'll go. I'll make up my mind by the 30th. All right, and then I'll just figure out who isn't here, and then,
Assign them a committee.
Assign them to a committee.
Right.
I know.
Penalty for not being.
Snooze, you lose. All right. Okay, well that's really cool. I'm really excited. So we'll meet on the 22nd, and we'll just need a couple of different rooms in addition to this one, right?
Right, so,
Right.
so what we'll do then, if we can assume all 3 committees, subcommittees are gonna meet, we will, as part of the notice of the meeting, we can also notice these subcommittee meetings. And, important to understand that you do have to have a quorum to meet.
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say it. If the quorum's gonna make decisions, you can actually meet
Yeah,
with a
without.
sub-quorum number of people, you just can't make any official decisions. So for the purposes of these subcommittees, they can probably almost always meet regardless of what.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you only have a 3 or 4 persons subcommittee, yeah.
Right, but if you're gonna decide that you officially, these are gonna be the official report of the subcommittee, you wanna have a quorum to vote on.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we really need to go there? You've got a group of 3 people, I mean, what's a quorum?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, I think he was just making the comment. I don't think we'll have to worry about
I
it.
mean, I mean, it's a small group, can we just come up with a recommendation and
this group should agree or
Yeah,
not.
it should
Yeah,
be
I-
all right.
I don't wanna overstate it, I'm just trying to make sure we don't wanna follow the right to know
Right to know laws,
So-
that's really the
Okay.
thing. Tara?
So, GoTo has a new procedure,
GoToWebinar?
yeah, GoToWebinar has a new, function, thank you, where we can meet concurrently in different rooms. I have not had an opportunity to test it. Do you want to try to test it for the 22nd? If so, I just need to know so I can get all the parts and pieces and logistics
Why
set
don't
up.
we talk about that after the
That-
meeting? So your idea is that they would be live streaming 3 things at once?
We can do the live streaming 3 times, or if we just want to record them.
Oh, just recording,
Just
yeah.
record
I
it
mean,
and
I
have
think
it-
recording it would
It
be
would
good.
schedule the whole meeting, alright, so either way,
Yeah.
it's the same amount of equipment.
All right.
But I
Okay.
will work on that.
All right, we can
I'll
talk
discuss.
about the technology.
Yeah, we got a month.
Yeah.
We got a month.
Okay. All right, excellent. And so when we meet, if people can bring their ideas or if they have information or whatever, that would be great. All right, so we've got that done. I mean, I don't know if we have to take a vote. Do we have consensus on this? I think we do. Okay.
So one
Yes, sir.
question, just for purposes of noticing, do we wanna say they're gonna meet?
First hour?
The first-
I think
yeah.
an hour and a half. What do you, I mean, at least or even 2 hours. I mean, I don't know.
Let's put an hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
and then we come here after for.
Right. And so maybe,
Does
Mike,
nine-
instead of starting at 9:30, we could start at 9,
Yeah.
go from 9 to 10:30, and then 10:30 to 12.
Does that work for you?
Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
Okay, excellent. And who knows what you might have for us to look at. You do have an announcement though. You got a second member hired for your planning department.
Yes, thank you. We did recruit for a planner in our Mike Nork section. Mike's not here today, but in the Mike Nork section. And happy to report that we have hired, she starts I think on the 11th, Paige Wilson, who some of you may know her name. She's worked with Lakes Region Planning on solid waste. We're really lucky and happy to get her. I mean, not a lot of people with the resume that she has coming to us. And she's done a lot of solid waste planning work for Lakes Region Planning, real self-starter, and really excited to bring her on board. So she'll be able to meet her at Friday next meeting.
Yeah, it's great. Congratulations, and happy for the legislature to have funded your second position. So that's good. Funding's always important. So speaking of the legislature, we have our member, Representative Pearl, who's the chair of House Environment and Agriculture.
Don't add anything else.
I mean, what's been interesting this time is several solid waste bills have gone to several different committees, so we both have had some challenges keeping track of them all. But anyway, go ahead.
And I certainly do not have a complete list of everything that went everywhere. I've tried mostly to focus on what was in the committee and some of the Senate bills that I picked up, but you already named one I missed, which was Senate Bill 380. But, so I don't have a complete and comprehensive overview of everything in the legislature, but I'll give you what I have. How's that? I was hoping Senator Gray would be here, maybe we could cover the Senate side, the things that happened there. So I guess as an update from where we were last time, I apologize that I did it from the plow truck last month, but that's part of my day life. And, hopefully you can sort of hear me. One of the bills that I touched on and that Representative Evil and I were talking about was House Bill 1049, which was a study committee that we established. And we sort of used it as a vehicle for many bills that were presented. We kind of combined them into one study committee. And so it does have a few things it's studying, and it will be a heavy lift for the committee, which is part of the reason that I worked and let House Bill 1454 go forward in subcommittee work, was to take some of the stress off what was in the study committee, if that makes sense to all of you. We kind of let that continue on through our committee, and we actually did end up passing House Bill 1454 on a voice vote last week when we were in session.
You might want to describe what
Yeah,
that
say
was.
that dealt with surface waters as it relates to landfill siting and the amount of time that it was going to take for contaminants to potentially travel through through the ground to local surface water, so it had a lot to do with soil transmissency and how all that worked. So House Bill 1049, again, became a vehicle with many bills combined. There were components of 4 other bills that ended up inside of it, but we had many that were dealing with landfill siting. So we decided it was prudent to just put one bill forward and not have multiple study committees and commissions established. We did it all as one. All right, so you ready? In a nutshell, it will study landfill siting criteria and reduce landfill capacity pressure. It will study disposable wipes as they pertain to ending up in a landfill. What we did is we took the disposable wipe study commission that was presented and we split it in 2. We put part of it into this study committee, and then we established another study committee as it relates to the difficulties that they have in municipal water and waste systems, because those can be very problematic. But it was kind of 2 different problems with landfill pressure, because a lot of them end up in a landfill, and the municipal water system. So we ended up splitting the text of that bill and putting part of it in 1049 and part of it we let go through as a separate study. It also discusses financial responsibility. I'm trying to remember if it's bonding, as I think it was, if I remember correctly. I apologize, I didn't come prepared to go quite that in depth, so I was quickly making notes here. And the final thing it did was it studies extended producer responsibility as it relates to, you know, folks that are manufacturing these things, what their responsibility should be as to what ends up in our solid waste stream. So that's kind of what happened with that bill. I know I've thrown a lot in all at once here. The main bill, as I said, that I guess the main thing that happened since I updated you last was House Bill 1454 going through on a voice vote. That has passed the House and is headed to the Senate. There's 2 bills, too many sheets of paper here. There are 2 bills that have been assigned to Environment Ag so far that have come over from the Senate. Senate Bill 367 and Senate Bill 396, and I've printed them off and quickly looked at them. 367 I am familiar with, I'm a co-sponsor. I had a briefing on that yesterday, and that was part of the reason I wanted to be on the 3rd committee, because that discusses and puts language in place for advanced recycling and manufacturing facilities, and I know the directors had a hand in crafting that language as well, so that it would give the department the things that they needed if someone wants to establish one of these advanced recycling facilities within the state. It's kind of intriguing. I really was something I didn't know a lot about, and I'm learning a lot about it. In a nutshell, it takes all of these plastics and takes them back to their base form and allows I'm trying to think of what he called it. It allows a stock to be created that can go back in and be used to make these different containers out of. And the question I asked, I said, what do you do with the impurities that are in these containers currently? And they said it's completely removed through this process. Because I said, well, I'll give you the worst case scenario. You take a pesticide container and you want to make a yogurt container. How does that work? And I was assured that this process will allow that to happen. That they completely remove all the impurities and it takes it back to its base form. So I'm still learning a lot about this. There's a whole bunch I don't know. Director may be able to fill in a little bit more, but I think your role probably was more on what you needed in place to manage the implementation of one of these rules.
Right. Really, advanced recycling is a very broad. And really,
Yes.
what at the end of the day, what the sponsors were looking for is they were trying to make sure that a facility that was going to, if you wanted to site a facility that was going to take a variety of plastics or particular kind of plastic, and then subject it to one of these more advanced recycling and what you described is one of them, where you'd actually bring it down to its base monomers and then resynthesize a particular plastic, that facility would not be regulated as a solid waste facility. And the reality is that right now you could do that, and there are facilities like that that under New Hampshire law they would technically be a permit exempt solid waste facility, because they would be taking in recyclables and then doing something with them to make a product. So we have very light regulatory touch on those, but the American Chemistry Council is behind this, is trying to establish legislation across the country, and they already have this in about, I think, 14 states, where they want it to be said these are not solid waste facilities. And we don't really have a concern about that. The only concern we had was that if you had, you know, the only time we have problems is when something goes wrong, right? So if a facility like that gets cited and it was going along and doing its work, it would be regulated like any other manufacturing facility, so there'd still be all the appropriate environmental controls on the operation of the facility, and that would be fine. The problem we had was if you take in, if a facility takes in, you know, 100 bales of plastics that have small amounts of contamination associated with them. Take milk jugs, for example. They got residual milk in them, and they got 100 bales of it out in the yard, and then they close down because things aren't going well, and suddenly there are rats and other things. We just want to make sure we still had our same core authorities to deal with that, so that, because if you say it's not solid waste, it's not regulated at all, then we would be in a position where we'd have the local government and neighbors saying, what are you going to do about this DES? And our authority essentially would have been stripped from us. So what we did is we managed to amend the bill so that, we encouraged them to amend the bill so that we would still, in that particular kind of situation, have the ability to address it through our normal enforcement authorities. But beyond that, the facility would not be considered a solid waste facility, and it would just be subject to regulation that any other manufacturing facility in the state would be subjected to. So it was a good example of really parties working with their concerns, working through the process of amending a bill, and now I think, you know, we support the bill at this point, and it's passed the Senate and it's on the House.
See, I knew he'd do a better job explaining it.
Not as briefly though.
The only other one that I have so far is Senate Bill 396, which I read quickly and I'm not familiar with it. It's a bill that was put in by Senator Kavanaugh, and it appears to just allow your department to enter into a written agreement with an applicant to retain an independent professional engineer or hydrologist to assist in determining what information is necessary to render the application technically complete. So it doesn't appear to be a real difficult bill, but I'll certainly look forward to hearing the details on it.
Can you not do that now, or?
We don't have explicit authority. For example, if we had an application that came to us where we just didn't have the in-house expertise to effectively evaluate it, we would not be in a position to hire a third-party consultant to advise us on that and then bill back the applicant. So this would give us the authority to say, okay, this is something we're not equipped for. We've got to bring in some outside expertise, and this would give us the ability to, you know, do that at the expense of the applicant.
And this
So,
will be a good testimony we'll get at the hearing when it's scheduled.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to.
So there was another one, Howard, maybe you want to talk about. I think it's 1420 that had to do with not permitting landfills
Oh, yes.
until the solid waste plan is done.
Yep. So we,
That just had a hearing. I think,
that's correct.
in the Senate
Yep, that was on my list too, and that had a hearing
this week.
Tuesday. Yeah, it was Tuesday morning in the Senate that it had a hearing. I didn't catch the whole hearing, I got called out on that one, but it did have a hearing. And basically what that's going to do is it prevents the department from putting or granting any new applications until this solid waste plan is done. Now, we obviously as a committee have the benefit of understanding that we anticipate it'll be done by October 1st, but I think what it did is it just said to the legislature is sending the message to the department and to this group that it's important we get this done, and we want to make sure that it's on track, and that was kind of the will of what the committee was moving forward, is we wanted to make sure that that message was sent, that we feel it's real important to get this solid waste plan done. And so we're putting a condition on it that no new landfills could be granted until that occurred. Now, the question that was raised, and I know you don't have the answer any more than you did when I asked it in committee, is does this impact current applications that are on file for landfills that are in progress? And we don't really have a clear answer on that, I'll be honest with you. I didn't get a clear answer, and you didn't have one to give, and I respect that and understand it. And I understand why it came through the way it did. But just as a heads up, so I don't know that it, but it, again, it was more about sending a clear message from the legislature that it's real important that we get this solid waste plan in place.
Well, you ended up amending it to exempt permitting for expansions?
Correct. That's correct, because we didn't want to affect current landfills that were already permitted. We were just looking to stop and make sure there wasn't new ones done until we had this plan in place. And the bill does sunset. I forget the date we ended up putting on it.
Is that, I'm sorry, I don't understand the legislative process so specifically that I understand exactly what the status of things are, but does that relate to the Senate Bill 380? Is that the same? Because it seems like there's similar language in the requirement of a solid waste plan in order to develop a solid waste facility.
I'm not familiar enough with 380. Do you have the answer to that?
All 380 sought to do more than it ultimately passed. It sought to amend the public benefit analysis that's for landfill permitting in our statutes. There was one other thing which I'm forgetting, but it also had a couple of study committees in it, and rather than create 2 new study committees, what they did was they added the things that the committees were going to study into our charge. And one was looking at the solid waste improvement plan by municipalities, the requirements for that, and then one was, I'm blanking on it. I had it at the tip of my tongue. What was the other?
Yeah, it's the,
Site evaluation committee for landfills. And they got rid of, as many times happens, the thing that was really going to make somebody do something. They made it more of a study topic. So that was 380. The other one that's making its way is SB 379, I think it is, which was originally introduced to create a disposal surcharge. It was amended to remove the surcharge, have a $500,000 appropriation, and then we're creating a solid waste disposal fund of sorts. But in coming through finance, surprise, they took out the $500,000 appropriation, which was viewed as sort of a Kickstarter, right? And so I'm not sure, has that been voted on by the Senate? I think it's just came through finance.
I lost track of that, but yeah. So right now, as I understand what it would do if it is to advance, is it would just simply create a fund.
Yeah, it would, right.
That would seem to be sort of what's the good fund without any money, but actually it might create kind of a good vessel for us in the sense that the bipartisan infrastructure law passed by the U.S. Congress, it's still really, EPA is still evolving and trying to figure out what it's going to look like, but it may, for the first time ever, it has appropriated significant funding, much of which could go to states for solid waste work, which we've never had before. And more than likely that money is going to be largely targeted to making grants to advance recycling and diversion technologies. And so theoretically, if we could, we're still waiting to find out what EPA is going to do, but we could get some substantial funding that might allow us to make incentive grants that I was talking about before. And so this would be a place where we could put that money in.
Right. I mean, I think it's a good thing, and it's a first step. So I was really pleased that it was coming through. I mean, the study committee that we had, that was one of the recommendations. We need some sort of funding, and you need a vehicle to accept the funding. So that was good. So I think the EPA funding was something like $275 million. Yeah, right. But so how would you, and then we've got to wrap it up really quickly, but would you decide based on the long range plan what grants you would apply for, or how would that work?
Well, I mean, what happens with federal money is that they're the blessing and the curse. They will very likely give some specific targeted reasons for how this money would be, how you can for this money and what you can do with it. And so we'll be limited by what they say we can do with it. And but to the extent that it's made available to us and we can go after it, we'll go after it. And right now we're going from zero. So even if we got $100,000 to make some incentive grants or something, that would be terrific. But it's just so amorphous right now because the EPA is still sorting out what these kinds of appropriations are going to look like in terms of how they actually get them out to. And they won't give it all to states. They may have some of their own
sure what might be available to the state agencies, but we're hopeful that at least some will.
Well, and I really think it would be great to the extent we're ready to pounce the minute those guidelines come out. You know, we're going to be ready. I think that would be that. I mean, that helps getting grants too, right? Okay, well, we're just about at the noon hour. I think we accomplished a lot. Thanks, Steve and Reagan, for your presentations. Did any other of the members want to add anything before we wrap up? Okay. And so the 22nd, it is Earth Day, and we'll keep you posted on the legislation. As you can see, there's a lot coming through. So, thanks.